Hello, cousin. Welcome to CoCo Conjure. Here we talk about all things hoodoo, folklore, magic, wellness, and spiritual journeys. My goal, as always, is to provide a foundation for the novice and inspiration to the advanced practitioner. If you have not guessed already, my name is CoCo. Cousin, thank you for joining me today. I'm speaking on a niche topic and an already small community, so I'm super blessed that you found me. Please be sure to leave a like and subscribe or follow wherever you are listening. To get us into the topic for today, I thought I would give you a pop quiz. I'm very sorry. There is in fact no time to study. This is not open book. You're going to have to use your intuition on this one. Dead, alive, myth, or legend, who is the most powerful conjure person in all of hoodoo history? You have option A, Dr. Buzzard. Option B, Marie Laveau, the voodoo queen. Option C, Aunt Carolyn Dye. Or option D, Gullah Jack. Think of it real, think of it long, think of it hard. Come up with your answer. Say it out loud. Lock it in. Got it locked in? The answer we are looking for to who is the most powerful conjure person in hoodoo history is Moses. Yes, that's right. I set you up. The answer is Moses. Moses is the most powerful conjure person in all of hoodoo history. Myth, legend, alive or dead, the answer is Moses. And you're like, who Moses? Burning bush Moses. The 10 Commandments Moses. Did you just dance around that golden calf after everything we did to get here? Moses. That Moses. To be fair, I can't be sure that Moses is in fact a real person. Definitely more myth than anything else. But in hoodoo and conjure, none of that matters because Moses is in fact the best that ever did it. Sorry I set you up, cousin. I apologize. Okay, so I hear you. You're asking me, CoCo, girl, cousin, you're not even Christian. How did you even come up with the answer Moses? Okay, let me show my work. So Yvonne P. Chireau, author of Black Magic, Religion, and the African American Conjuring Tradition, you know her, I talk about her. She explores the ties between hoodoo and Christianity in her book. She writes, the relationship between conjure and Christianity was fluid and constantly shifting. Supernatural practitioners often adopted symbols from Christian traditions for use in their own practices and rituals. She goes on to say, lore and images from the Christian Bible also provide fertile territory from which African American specialists could acquire conjuring materials. So, the idea here, especially for traditionalists, is that what faith alone cannot do, the use of spiritual forces will in fact cover. Even now, as modern hoodoos run rampant online and a lot of us are exploring, recreating, reconstructing our cultural spiritual practices, the big line here is, in hoodoo, the Bible is a spell book. It's full of conjurers and their formula. And you don't have to be a full believing member of the Christian faith in order to use the conjure within the Bible. So, as a hoodoo, no matter where you fall on the religious spectrum, we can easily acknowledge the myths and legends of the Bible being a cornerstone as hoodoo developed on North American soil. So, let's place ourselves in our ancestors' shoes. Imagine being a slave on a plantation. It's Sunday, and the master of the plantation is also the local minister. Today is the single day of rest for the entire week, and he gathers up all his property, all of his slaves, for an afternoon sermon. Besides giving sermons and using biblical text to tell you why he's great and you in fact are not, he's also hitting the Bible's greatest hits. Jesus feeding the masses with almost nothing. Job petitioning God as the devil wreaks havoc in his life. Samson getting his hair cut and having his power torn away from him. Us, our ancestors, as slaves, would have heard these stories, thought about them in a cultural context, and realized almost all of this sounds like conjure. Even to us now, we can look at this through a conjure lens. Hair is a powerful personal concern. Prayer and petition are done most to chase the devil or negative energies out of your life. And I can testify personally that my money pot has helped me stretch $1 until a bill was paid. So it's easy to see in this example how biblical text, the stories therein, are the cornerstone of early hoodoo. Where does Moses fit in all this? Let me tell you a story. I first ran across this story in American Negro Folktales by Richard M. Dorson, and then again in From My People, 400 Years of African American Folklore by Daryl Cumber Dance. The story is called How Hoodoo Lost His Hand, and it goes something like this. The Israelites was captured and carried down in bondage under Egypt, and Moses was born there. And they were killing all males to keep the Hebrew children from multiplying so fast, and when Moses was born, his mother kept him and hid him 3 months. Then, when she could keep him no longer, she made a basket of bulrushes and slime. And so she carried him down and put him in the river where Pharaoh's daughter went down to bathe. When they seen him, he was a fine, super fine Egyptian boy. Then the daughter carried him to the king, that's Pharaoh, and begged her daddy to let her keep him and adopt him. So he agreed. Go out and find you a nurse, an Israelite woman, for they know how to take care of this baby. So she goes out and hires an Israelite woman who just so happened to be Moses' mother. So he waxed and grew fast and learned all the Egyptian words and Egyptian languages. So Pharaoh made him a ruler then, when he seed how smart exactly he was. So one day he walks out and he sees a Hebrew and an Egyptian fighting. So Moses, he killed this Egyptian, looked all around and see nobody, and buried him in the sand. A couple days after he went out and he see 2 Hebrews fighting, he said, "Why do y'all strive against each other? Ain't y'all's brothers?" One said, "You want to kill one of us like you did that Egyptian the other day?" So Moses got scared and he run away into Midian. He stayed there 40 years and married this Ethiopian woman, which, that's a colored woman. One day he was out minding his father-in-law's sheep, and the Lord spoke unto Moses and said, "Pull off your shoes, for you's on holy ground. I want you to go back and deliver my children from Egypt." He said, "Moses, what is it you got in your hand?" And Moses said, "Oh man, it's my staff." God said, "Cast it on the ground," and it turned into a snake. And Moses fled from it. The Lord said, "Go back and pick it up." So Moses picked it up and turned it back to a staff. The Lord said, "Go back and wrought all these miracles in Egypt and deliver my children from bondage." So Moses goes back. He goes into Pharaoh and told him what the Lord had told him to do. Pharaoh said, "Who is he? I can show you what he got the power to do." And he cast his rod on the floor and turned it into a serpent. Pharaoh said, "Boy, that ain't nothing. I got any magician who can do that." So he brought his magicians in and soothsayers in, and they cast their rods on the floor. So theirs turned to snakes, and they crawled up to Moses' snake. and Moses' snake swallowed their snakes. And that's where Hoodoo lost his hand, because theirs was the evil power and his was the good. They lost their rods and he had theirs too. So I've come across this story twice. It's in, like I said, it's in American Negro Folktales. It's in For My People, 400 Years of African American Folklore. These are folklore stories, right? American Negro Folktales, Richard M. Dorson went out and collected these stories from Black people, like went to their homes, went to where they live, thrive, survive, and collected their stories, right? And it's literally just the story of Moses. Right? I mean, some stuff is cut out, no burning bush, none of that. We don't get his brother Aaron talking to the people, but it's still just the story of Moses. And for the life of me, for the longest time, I could not figure out like why this is there outside of, Moses being someone who freed his people. Then I don't know. I took a different perspective. So let's look at this from a plantation or traditional hoodoo's perspective, right? This guy Moses, he's something else, right? Like completely something else. He carries a mojo or a hand, just like any local conjure man or root lady. And I guess most importantly, he had a direct line to the source of all power, right? He had a direct line to God. And at this time, we're talking Egypt. We're talking, the Jewish God, Yahweh, whatever you want to call him, the Abrahamic God. So he's a God in a array of many, right? And Pharaoh had his gods and his magicians working, whatever they were working. But it was Moses's hand, his power, his mojo, that was more powerful, right, than anything Pharaoh could come up with. Even if we apply it to the rest of what we know about Moses' story in the Bible, he knew what to do. He knew to smear the blood on the door frame. He knew, how to protect his people from the locusts, right? He was able to part seas because of this, this mojo, this power from God. So from that perspective, I get it, right? Like I get how he's viewed as a conjure man and maybe perhaps one of the most powerful conjure men to ever exist, myth, legend, whatever. Zora Neale Hurston spells it out in her book of Mules and Men. She says, the way we tell it, Hoodoo started way back there before everything. 6 days of magic spells and mighty words, and the world and its elements above and below was made. So what she's saying is that the source of everything, God, however you want to call that, is the first spark of magic, right? The creation story is magic in and of itself, right? She goes on to say, Moses was the first man who ever learned God's power compelling words, and it took him 40 years to learn 10 words. So between Hurston and the folklore story, or just the story of Moses that I read to you, we can draw the conclusion that because Moses had this direct line of power and his hand or his mojo was greater than anyone Pharaoh had on retainer, he was in fact like the most powerful conjure person around, right? And then I started thinking about it a little bit more, and I realized like Moses even followed the steps of learning to conjure, right? Even though he had, a touch by God, he was touched by God or by the source of all magic, he still had to learn how to use it from a living legend, right? He had to learn how to, he had to prepare himself by being around other conjure people, other hoodoos, if that's how we want to apply the term. Zora goes on to detail that Moses would not have been prepared if he had not first married Jethro's daughter. So in a hoodoo reading of the Bible, even in that folklore story version of Moses, Jethro is considered, he's a black man from Ethiopia. He's considered a conjure man himself. Zora writes, Jethro could tell Moses could carry power as soon as he saw him. In fact, he felt him coming. Therefore, he took Moses and crowned him and taught him. So Moses passed on beyond Jethro with his rod. He lifted it up and tore a nation out of Pharaoh's side, and Pharaoh couldn't help himself. That's wild. That's a wild reading of this story that, we were all taught probably as children. It's crazy. Like, that's wild to me, The myth of Moses is one that our ancestors would have latched onto quickly as cultures mixed and, this new faith was promoted. To them, Moses is one of us, maybe even the best of us. He was an African Jew born into slavery, taught by an African conjure man how to use his power. Moses held the power to create and defy the odds. He spoke to the source of all power and was able to channel that power into his staff, his mojo. And maybe most importantly, one that I haven't hit on yet, Moses was a liberator. What could not be done with, mundane means, peace talks, simple prayer, Moses accomplished with direct from source conjure. And in the myths and legends found within hoodoo history, from plantation till now, dead or alive, no one, not a single person, can outpace that kind of mojo. So there you have it. When they say the Bible is full of conjure, full of hoodoo, now you know what they're talking about. Right? Like, it's a different perspective. It's a different reading. It's less, true believing faith. I believe this to be what it is, and more, cultural reinterpretation of the same stories. I think that's wild. I think it's pretty cool. I think it's pretty cool that, what I learned and what I later rejected comes back to me in a completely different package, in a completely different light. It's no longer, oh yeah, Moses was a real guy and this happened. It's more of a, this is the myth of a people. This is, history personified, written down, the best of, what they wanted to tell about themselves. And in turn, because it, was taught across cultures, across ethnicities, anyone can adopt these stories as their own and find inspiration, find meaning in it to keep moving forward. Unrelated to Moses, but on the same vein, I think that's why Jesus is such a big deal in hoodoo as well. Even if you don't believe he died on the cross for your sins or whatever, like he also had, a direct power from God. And when he spoke, things happened, right? Like my favorite one was when Jesus cursed the fig tree and then the thing started wilting. Like, what the hell is going on there? You know what I mean? Or like the blind man can see, the laying of hands, blind man can see. Like, I think that's why too, he's such a prevalent figure, not just because of the Christianity, but he can also be read as a conjure person, as someone who held mojo in his hands, someone who had a direct tap from source. And there's an argument about that all over the internet, about Jesus as a magician. I don't know. I don't know if I would classify him as a magician, but I definitely get where that story comes from. I can't remember which of the Gospels, whether it's Matthew or Luke, one of the two, but like it's full of him exercising things. Jesus, just exercising stuff. Right? So I get it. I get why saying things in the name of Jesus is also, pretty heavy. I guess the reason why Moses is, in my opinion, I gave that pop quiz like it was a legit fact. It's not a legit fact, but in my opinion, the reason why Moses is the most powerful hoodoo is because by Christianity's own definition, Jesus is an aspect of God. And at that point, that's just cheating. That's just cheating. And before we move on, I just want to say, remember that as you build your practice in hoodoo, as you build your practice as a conjure person, as a root person, you can take and leave what you want. Like, we are not traditionalists. We are not on the plantation. We are, in fact, modern practitioners. And we can respect the cornerstones and the foundations without having to fall hook, line, and sinker to the doctrine that surrounds it. You feel what I'm saying? So if you don't want to use a psalm, if you don't want to use the Bible as a spell book, if you don't want to, believe hardcore, like if you're like me and you see these as myths and legends no different than the Greek gods or the Egyptian gods or whoever else, then that's also acceptable. And you don't have to use the Bible in your hoodoo. It's not a requirement. All right. You have made it to the questions and answers portion of the podcast where I venture out into the wild space of the internet and pick some questions off of witch boards, hoodoo boards, conjure boards, occult spaces, and try to answer them as best to my ability. So this first one comes from Conjure Root Work and Hoodoo, one of my favorite places to traipse around. If you see me there, say hi. Hey, friend. So the question is, hey, family, I'm new. Does hoodoo and conjure include Ifism and the Orishas? Okay, so I'm guessing that's like Ifa and Orisha traditions and so forth. So short answer is no, they are not in fact connected. Hoodoo is a folk magic practice. It's a magic system of healing and harming created on American soil by, enslaved people and Black Americans. There's a lot of cultural influence in that. I'm not saying there is not, but that's the gist of it. So no, the Orisha are not inherently a part of hoodoo. Like I said, Christianity, if you're looking for a religion around hoodoo, Christianity is the cornerstone. Now that said, in modern times, I've said before, I'll say again, we understand that you do not have to be Christian in order to respect, practice, participate in a hoodoo, conjure, root work practice, right? And a lot of times what people will do is they turn their backs to Christianity and instead will try to reach for African spiritual practices, African deities, African spirits, etc., like the Orisha. So people will start in hoodoo and then use that as a stepping stone into other ATRs or ADRs. That's African traditional religions or African derived religions. And, I respect that. But no, just like how there are hoodoos out here who are not Christian, there are also hoodoos out here who are not following the path of Ifa or the Orishas. Okay, next question, last question. Also from Conjure Root Work and Hoodoo, it says, hello. I've taken an interest in hoodoo recently. Took me a couple of weeks to realize that voodoo or vodou is not the same as hoodoo. And so I was looking in the wrong place, especially its impact on Black history, and I want to start practicing. I still haven't done much research on it yet, so forgive me if I sound ignorant at any point and I don't know where to start. There's something I want to try as well using hoodoo magic, but I don't know if it's within the boundaries or within my capabilities. Basically, there's a ghost in my dorm that likes to knock and scratch on walls, and I've been wanting to contact it for a while now. Do you know any spells I can do in order to communicate with it? Ooh, child. Just okay. So yes, voodoo and hoodoo are not the same. Voodoo or vodou, that's a religion. Uh, it's derived from Vodun, right, with an N. But there's Haitian Vodou and there's New Orleans Voodoo, and they are practices around serving the Loa. And hoodoo, that's not a thing. So hoodoo is the folk magic. Voodoo with a V is the religion. Okay, so I'm glad we got that out the way. Its impact on Black history, sure. There are plenty of people in Black American history. I'm going to classify American as North American and continent. So from Mexico to Canada, who had heavy spiritual life, spiritual power, and use that as inspiration, use that as foundation for the liberation of themselves and of their people. As a matter of fact, you could probably even say even in the Caribbean, same thing. So, sure. Yes, there are a lot. The first person that comes to mind is Harriet Tubman. I'm not going to give too much about her here because in the next episode, I'm going to discuss Harriet Tubman and her spiritual life and, what she did to liberate her people. She's called the Moses of her people, or Mother Moses, in Hoodoo. So yes, there's a lot there that can be talked about. I think Nat Turner is another one. His spiritual life had him lead a rebellion. He died for that, but that's another one. So sure, yes, there's a lot of that, of hoodoo or Black spiritual practices that have influenced Black history, American history. Sure. Now, you lost me and I almost cannot take you seriously at that last part. If you know nothing about hoodoo and you know nothing about conjure or root work or any of that stuff, and you just yesterday realized that hoodoo with an H and voodoo with a V are two different things, you're not going to talk to a ghost or a poltergeist. Like, it's just, I can't even take you seriously. And the idea that you would like to use a spiritual practice to communicate with a ghost in your dormitory is slightly insulting, definitely wild. It's wild. So I'm not even going to entertain that. Well, you know what? Here's what I'm going to tell you. You don't know hoodoo, you don't know voodoo. And those practices, it's definitely going to take some time and much longer than a quick 1, 2, 3 to teach you spirit communication. But if you want to get rid of it, you can throw some salt around. You can shout at it to get out of your place. You can light some sage, or you can do, the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram. Look that up. Give it a try. But otherwise, I'm not even going to, can't even entertain that as a thought, that the only reason why you would get into hoodoo is so that way you can practice necromancy and talk to ghosts and some shit. That's wild and out of pocket. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. Okay, so we have reached the end of this podcast. Congratulations. Thank you for staying with me for so long. I had a fun time. I hope you guys had a fun time. Who would have thought? I would have never thought I'd be telling Bible stories on this podcast. But like I said, it kept popping up as Moses as the greatest conjure person, one of the first conjure people. And it just boggled my mind. You know what it did? It also reminded me that in the Bible, there's so many different, it's focused around a certain region. And a lot of that region overlaps with the African continent. You know what I mean? So when we talk about Moses, when we talk about Pharaoh, when we talk about Jethro, when we talk about Sheba, the Queen of Sheba, we're talking about like African people. And Africa as a continent is huge. And because it's huge, it's diverse. You know, we don't all look the same. We're not all dark skinned, wide nosed. We all look a little different. So black cannot be defined in that way. But it's the motherland. And I get why our people, our ancestors brought to this country, would see inspiration, see hope in stories about, you know, African people thriving and surviving, you know, and that perhaps in teaching these folks, you know, about God, about Moses, about Jesus, about, you know, the ability to overcome, that I can't help but think, I should say, that led to, you know, freedom, not just for black folks, but, you know, also for the white allies who rallied for the freedom of these people. I definitely wanted to make sure I told this story and told this perspective before next episode. Next episode, like I said, I'm going to discuss Harriet Tubman. I'm going to discuss her visions and her voices of God in her head. Very Joan of Arc, very Moses. It's a wild ride with her. And I want to talk about some of my favorite stories around her leading people out of bondage and how she inspired folks. So yeah, I guess this was a primer for that, but also just, I don't know, just a good time to talk about something that I learned so young, and how perspective change really helped me to appreciate this story in a different way. The story of Moses in a different way. Okay, so before we go, cousin, I want to let you know that you deserve the world. You really do. That when things are looking kind of rough, and when you don't feel like you have the power, or you feel like you're being pushed down, shoved aside, that you do in fact have the power to make things happen. That you do in fact have a piece of source at your fingertips, so you can change the outcome. You can change your perspective, change your view, and you can, you know, reshape a future in a way that is in accordance with your wants, your goals, your desires. And if you call for your blessings, cousin, if you call for those blessings, they will in fact come to you. Thank you, guys. See you guys next time.